Hello and welcome to another video on the series I'm doing on Jinn. I'm going to go through another book which is an excellent source on information about the Jinn. This is called Living with Djinns, Understanding and Dealing with the Invisible in Cairo by Barbara Drieskens. Barbara Drieskens spent a lot of time in Cairo amongst lower middle class families to research how belief in the Jinn affected their lives. I'm going to read straight from the book now, so when it refers to the first person, it's obviously the author. A central question guiding my research was not what Djinns are, but how the Koreans see them. The new Islamic trend has had its influence on the way Koreans talk about them, compared to the characterizations found in older ethnographies, especially those focusing on Zar. Zar is a healing ceremony. Djinns have recently obtained an Islamicized, sober image. The existence of Djinns and their origin is mentioned in the Quran, and thus are beyond doubt for the religious Muslim. Yet the details of their nature, their character, and their lives are all quite contradictory. On these points, religious texts leave a lot of room for interpretation, and religious presentations are complemented by folk stories and pre-Islamic religions of Arabic and Egyptian origin. Islamic presentations of Djinns postulate that just as human beings were Allah's creations, Djinns were also created at the beginning of time. If humans were created out of clay or mud, then Djinns were made out of fire. They are intelligent beings, imperceptible to our senses, but not disembodied. Even if they are sometimes referred to as souls, most people agree that Djinns do have a body, but one less tangible than humans. Most of the booklets on Djinns, possession, healing, and related topics have an elaborate introduction explaining the generally accepted Islamic view on Djinns. The authors refer to the Quran and the Hadith as the authoritative sources, and most of their analysis is based on the Surat al-Jinn. According to the Quran, Djinns are capable of salvation, and Muhammad was sent for them as well as mankind. Some of them will burn in hell, while others will enter paradise. In other parts of the Quran, however, especially in the Korean interpretation of those verses, there is much ambiguity concerning the moral qualities of Jinn. This is due to their obscure relation to Iblis on one hand and to the devil on the other. Iblis is the disobedient one who refuses to kneel before Adam when Allah ordered him to do so. For most Korean Muslims, Iblis is another name for the devil, Al-Shaitan. According to some passages in the Quran, Iblis is one of the Jinn, but other verses refer to him as an angel. And when we said to the angels, "Bow yourselves to Adam," so they bowed themselves, save Iblis. He was one of the Jinn and committed ungodliness against his Lord's command. 1850. And behold, we said to the Djinns, "Bow yourself to Adam," and they bowed down. Not so Iblis. He refused and was haughty. He was one of those who rejected faith. 2:34. Consequently, there is much confusion. Some say Iblis is the father of all Djinns. They identify the Djinns with Al-Shaitan, the devils. This identification is problematic because it contradicts the notion that some Djinns have converted to Islam, that there are good and righteous Djinns just as there are evil ones. Others avoid this contradiction by saying that Shaitan are simply unbelievers among the Djinns, the sons of Iblis and one tribe among many. Thus, the term does not refer to the Muslim, Christian, or Jewish Djinns. At the beginning of Islamic civilization, the existence of Djinns was generally accepted among theologians as it is today, and the full consequences implied by their existence were worked out. Their legal status was in all respects discussed and fixed, and possible relations between them and human beings, especially questions of marriage and property, were examined. Some of the famous Islamic philosophers dealt with the nature of Djinns. Ibn Sina asserted flatly that there was no reality to them, while Ibn Khaldun acknowledged all references to the Jinn in the Quran, but asserted that Allah reserved knowledge of them for himself. This ambivalence towards the reality of Djinns still exists in Cairo today. The increasing influence of the new Islamic trend has made Djinns a topic of public discourse. Most of the preachers openly acknowledge Djinns' existence, stating that the verses of the Quran should be taken literally, but condemning many of the Korean practices and beliefs as superstition and make-believe. Their endeavour has two striking effects. First, the publication as well and re-editing of many books on these subjects, and the second, the condemnation of related practices and beliefs to the domain of silence and secrecy. In some cases, like healing through Zar, it has caused a dramatic reduction in the practice of rituals. Listening to stories about Djinns can teach us a lot about how they are perceived among the lower middle-class inhabitants of Cairo. There is no such a thing as a generally accepted narrative of Djinns in which all characteristics are united. In this section I will mention the aspects of the Djinns as they appeared in different stories, but each story stands on its own. It would be inaccurate to unite these characteristics in a single list, stating that Djinns are fast, old, disobedient, and passionate, for instance. Each characteristic has to be considered in the specific context of the story or event in which it occurs and can only be generalized in a limited and careful way. The most colourful and typical characterizations of the Jinn belong to the context of Zar. In these rituals of reconciliation, different Djinns always recur in stereotyped images. The limping English general who drinks whiskey, the Turkish Basha playing with his moustache, the Ethiopian wild man dancing like a fool, and the serious Coptic priest. Beyond this particular context, Djinns are plainer. There is no fixed repertory of characters, names, and origins. Most Koreans say that Jinn are fast, much faster than human beings. They can travel to Aswan and back in only a second. Sharif told me that when she was young, her parents knew a very powerful sheikh who was in contact with a Murid, a very powerful Jinn, whose name was Malik, which means king. Her parents used to invite the sheikh over to ask him about their relatives in Upper Egypt, and the sheikh would sit under a blanket and read Quranic texts until the spirit came and talked through his mouth. Sharif's father asked the Jinn all kinds of detailed questions about his relatives, who lived in many different places, and the information given was always accurate. Sharif said that in just 1 second the Jinn had travelled to Aswan and back to find out the answers. Another much more famous story illustrating the speed of the Djinns is the story of Aladdin and the lamp, in which the Djinns built him a beautiful palace in only one night. The story of Suleiman illustrates the Djinn's ability to do the heavy labour under the assignment of a human with special powers or a gift. The magical powers that the Prophet Suleiman had over the Djinns are legendary. He took all the Djinns under his command and made them build not only the Temple of Jerusalem but the whole city. This was described in detail in an article in the newspaper Hadith al-Madinah. It recounts how the Djinns brought marble and precious stones from all corners of the earth, dyed for pearls and dug for diamonds. Some persons I talked to claimed they had Djinns serving them. This service was not based on their controlling the Jinn, but on their invisible companions' love and devotion for them. Many Koreans agree that gifts and favours from Djinns should be kept secret because otherwise the Djinns might be insulted and the good they did would turn into evil and suffering. Several persons told me that Djinns live the same way humans do. They eat and drink, so it is important to mention the name of Allah before starting a meal, or the Djinns will eat together with the humans. Those who eat without mentioning Allah's name might not notice when the food they will eat will not give them any energy or fill their stomachs. Secretly, the Djinns are eating in their place. Djinns eat the leftover from meals, therefore it is better not to keep garbage in the house for long, but to throw it on the staircase or out the window or in an empty spot behind the house. This habit causes many hygiene problems. Cats spread the garbage all over the stairs. The accumulation of waste attracts vermin and spreads an unpleasant smell. These spots are an ideal dwelling space for Djinns. Many people fear the cats that come looking for the food and the rubbish because they think they are Djinns in cat form. There are many stories about this kind of transformation. For example, an article in Hadith al-Madinah features a cat that can speak Arabic and that is probably Jinn. Mahasin mentioned that when her sister gave birth to twins, a cat sneaked into the house. Her sister chased the animal and hit it on the head, but this cat was in fact Jinn, and it took revenge by hitting one of the babies in the head and the child died. Djinns can take on many different forms, but cats are common. Many people warn me not to chase a cat away, especially in the early morning or late at night. A black dog, on the contrary, is the form in which Iblis, or the devil, appears. Djinns can also appear as snakes, birds, goats, and other animals, as well as human beings. How they actually look is subject to much speculation. Some say they have the legs of a goat, a black tail, or a lot of hair all over the body. Some say that their eyes are set vertically in the face, and they are exceptionally tall. These kind of imaginary representations can be found in books as illustration or drawings to help a reader who wants to call up Djinns. Most healers said that Djinns can live much longer than humans, some for 1,000 years or more. Many of my interlocutors considered it dangerous to dig for archaeological treasures into open graves of the pharaonic period. They believe that these places are protected by witchcraft that ties a Djinn to the grave that will harm anybody who violates a sacred place even after 5,000 years. Muhammad was possessed by a spirit from the Roman period. He said a few times that he saw this spirit. It looked exactly like Kirk Douglas in Spartacus. Even if the Jinn was very old compared with humans, he was still in the prime of his Jinn life. Muhammad was sure of that. If we could talk to his Jinn, it would be possible to discover a lot of new things about the past, but the Roman Jinn was difficult. Even if some Jinns were willing to talk, they could not always be trusted to tell the truth. This unreliability is a general characteristic of all Jinns, warned Adele. Even if the Jinn claims to be Muslim, it is not certain that he can be trusted. Once a man came to consult him about an illness, and Adele discovered the man was possessed by a female Jinn. He made the Jinniya talk through the mouth of the possessed, and she told him she had been sent to this man by magic, sihir, that forced her to harm him. The Jinniya pretended that it was his wife who had afflicted. It was the wife of the afflicted who had bewitched Sahir, him. Later it turned out that she had been lying, and she wanted to separate the man she loved from his wife. In Egyptian stories, Jinns appear as male and female. Often men are tormented by female Jinns that are in love with them. Female Jinns can take on the most charming appearance. They spend all night with their victims, then disappear in the morning. This characteristic of Jinns is recognized in institutional Islam, but when a male Jinn loves a human woman, it is considered an illicit relationship. Many Koreans say that this is because women are weaker than men, and that the Jinn would have a complete control over them. Others say this due to the complications that would arise if the woman became pregnant by her Jinn lover. Children of female Jinn are invisible like her, but those of a male Jinn are just like humans. I heard of a woman who was pregnant by her Jinn husband, but of course, many people doubted the reality of this explanation. When her father accused her of dishonoring the family, he kicked her. She had a miscarriage, giving birth not to a baby, but to a slipper. This proved, according to the narrator, that she'd been truly impregnated by a Jinn. Some men in Cairo visited a sheikh with a request to marry a female Jinn so they could satisfy their needs until they could afford to marry a human girl. Ahmed's friend, who was in his 30s and still unmarried, went to the church to ask a Coptic priest to marry him to a female Jinn. They say he's quite happy now, but nobody really knows if he has succeeded in his objective, because he who marries a Jinniya is forbidden to reveal a secret. If he does, the spirit could take revenge by possessing him and making him lose his mind. Jinns are passionate and jealous in their relationships with human beings. They often try to prevent their human lover from thinking about anybody else, and they cause trouble if he or she wants to end the relationship and exercise the Jinn in order to live a normal life. Many unmarried men and women remain single not because they want to or because they have not found the right partner, but because of a Jinn. Koreans say that it is often the most beautiful girls who fall victim to the passion of a Jinn, who demands to have her for himself. Ilham, Samia's daughter, was married for more than 12 years and had 3 children, but there were problems between her and her husband. In her sleep, and when awake, she spoke disrespectfully to her husband, not because she wanted to, because the spirit forced her. She did not even realize it. They consulted many healers to try and find a cure for the torture that had turned the marriage into a hell, but no sheikh was strong enough to force the Jinn to leave her body permanently. Sometimes the spirit could be made leave, but he always came back after treatment. Ilham's husband often sat and talked with the Jinn while Ilham slept. He tried to argue that it was not right to stay with his wife and cause all these problems between them, but the spirit never wanted to give in. In many stories, Jinns appear as vindictive creatures who seldom forgive someone who has harmed them. When Ilham consulted the sheikh to rid her of her unwanted lover, the spirit came back and made her very ill. She suffered from pains in her stomach, and no doctor could find a solution for her. With her mother, she even went to see a specialist, but to no avail. Back home at her mother's place, she fell asleep. Samia was watching TV when she felt a presence in the room. She asked who was there, and the spirit answered through the mouth of Ilham, but with a completely different voice. Samia cursed him and threatened him that he should leave her daughter alone, but her ranting had no effect, until she started to reason with the spirit. She told him that it was not logical to harm and torture her daughter so much if he really loved her. She did not care if he stayed or not, only that he'd take away Ilham's pain. In the end, the spirit agreed and gave Samia the prescription of Quranic texts to heal Ilham. As I mentioned above, the distinction between good and evil jinns is not always clear. Koreans say that most jinns are disobedient, even if they have converted to Islam and know the Quran. Conversations between healers and jinn told by old Egyptian authors on healing are described by a scholar. What the authors of these books do not mention is what most Korean people say. Some sheikhs are able to chase the jinn from a human being using solely the Quranic word and rational arguments based on religious premises. But in most cases, the jinn leaves the body only for a short while. Samia told me that they went all the way to the borders of Giza to meet a sheikh to rid Ilham of her jinn. The treatment was successful and the girl felt much better. However, when they arrived home, the jinn was waiting for her on the doorstep. Even before she entered the house, she was possessed again. Moreover, her suffering increased because of the painful revenge exerted by the spirit, who had just promised the sheikh to let her live in peace. Jinns, especially those associated with Zar, are presented as envious and greedy for food and objects. Some will desire gold and new clothes. Others demand cakes, sweets with milk. Still others have a more exclusive taste for cigars, whiskey, and sunflower seeds. As greedy and envious beings, jinns can cast an evil eye on people, especially when someone frequently admires himself in front of a mirror. They cast the eye through the eyes of the victim so they can bring the evil forces of Hasad onto themselves. Koreans fear jinn. Not only can they harm people through illness, they can even kill. Many horror films depict their terrifying and destructive acts. An article in Al-Arham newspaper mentioned the story of a retired civil servant who killed his neighbours during an attempt to exorcise the jinn possessing her. He blamed this killing on the influence of the jinn who had overpowered him. Evil jinns can easily harm people who are not strong in their beliefs, but ironically jinns like nothing more than to harm those who are conscientious worshippers. Unbelievers among the jinn find great pleasure in seducing good Muslims to leave the right path. Very similar to the Christian idea of demonic influence there as well. In this respect, they are often identified with Iblis or Al-Shaitan. However, even without evil intentions, jinns are considered to be harmful. They are fire, and like fire that is not contained, they burn and destroy. Sharif told me that once her father wished to thank Malak, the jinn that the sheikh used to consult on behalf of his family members. He told the sheikh that he wished to shake the jinn's hand. At first the sheikh refused, warning him this would be too dangerous. But when the father insisted, he agreed. The sheikh sat underneath the blanket and called Malak, who started to talk. Sharif's father offered to shake Malak's hand. The jinn accepted. But when Sharif's father reached out his hand towards the blanket, he cried out in pain. The heat of the jinn had burned his palm. While belief in jinns and stories about them are widespread in suburban Cairo, there also exists a whole folklore of various kinds of spirit beings, sometimes considered as subgroups of jinn, and sometimes as other classes of other beings. It's useless to make a general classification of these creatures, as Koreans never agree on the topic, but it's equally impossible to give an overview of all the different interpretations and explanations, because they constantly change. Here again, the most interesting question is not what they are, but what they do. How they appear in different stories, and what the multiple meanings of those stories are. There are Afrit, plural Afaret, who according to some of the ghosts are a person who died a violent death. Afaret wander around the house or the place of death for 40 days after the person has died. In some stories they keep appearing for years. The status of an Arafrit is ambiguous. According to the strict Islamic interpretation, the soul of the deceased goes straight to Allah and waits for Judgment Day and never returns to earth. Some say that souls descend every Thursday to receive the prayers at the grave. Others think that it is not the Afrit, but the souls, Arwah, of those who died violently who haunt a place. The conviction that places where blood is shed are haunted is generally shed among Koreans, but they prefer to specify the nature of these haunting creatures in order to avoid contradicting religion. They usually refer to them as Arafit and say they are just different kinds of jinn. They do not explain the relationship between them and the dead. Stories about scary Arafit are popular in Cairo. They inspire fewer mixed feelings and less secrecy than stories about the Jinn, which imply a moral judgment of the subject matter and its narrator. Sharif, for example, showed me the flat that he had bought in Mbaba. He was working hard to prepare for his future bride. He told me how one day while he was working, his neighbour called on him. She told him that she had seen something strange on the roof opposite her, jumping up and down. It was neither human or animal. From her description, Sharif thought it was an Urfit. The neighbour told him that the vision had indeed appeared after the old man who used to live on the roof had died. Sharif thought he had recognised this kind of spirit, which jumps all the time. He wears a white bathing cap and a white bathing suit, and has two big teeth. He had dealt with one like it when a woman trying to keep him away from her daughter bewitched him, Sahir. The Jinn she had sent to him was of the same variety. As Sharif explained to me how he chased the spirit away, he constantly switched between Afrit, Jinn, and Qarin. He called it Afrit in relation to the death of the old man, and Jinn when he wanted to avoid the problem of the souls of the dead in relation to his own experience as a victim of witchcraft. He used Qarin when he talked about the intimate relationship between the spirit on the roof and his neighbour, since the creature had apparently also started to visit her in her sleep. This example shows clearly that any static or strict categorization is artificial and does not suit the Korean's experience and forms of expression. The Korean sometimes qualifies as a different kind of Jinn and sometimes as a separate category of being. In Cairo, it is usually defined as the brother or sister under the earth that accompanies every human being from birth to death. Sometimes this Korean also appears as a jealous lover, but this is in respect to some Koreans identify with Hawi. And in this respect, some Koreans identify with Makawi. The name Makawi is used for Djinns who are in love with human beings. There are many Djinns related to the waters of the Nile and irrigation canals. Stories about these creatures are less popular in Cairo, and most of them are only second-hand accounts of things that happened to relatives in the village. Nevertheless, in Shubra al-Kamia, many people told me there was a Jinnya in the Nile with long, beautiful blonde hair and the tail of a fish. She tries to seduce men, women, and children and come close to the water's edge, then grabs them and drags them underwater. Khalid told me that this Nile Jinn gives each victim a choice: marry her, marry one of her people, or die. The corpses of those who refuse to live with her underwater in the underwater world are found a few days later on the riverbank with visible traces of her tongues in the neck where she strangled them. He told me this happens regularly. She used many tricks to seduce people into approaching the riverside at night, making a tray with glasses of tea float on the surface or a bowl that floats in the waves, or disguising herself as an old woman and asking an unsuspecting passerby to help her carry a heavy pot. Unlike Djinns, angels, Malakia, are obedient creatures. They all obeyed Allah when he ordered them to kneel before Adam. They have a positive protective influence on the environment to protect little children from dying in their sleep. They protect people against the evil of Djinns and bring money, peace and harmony into a house. In principle, Koreans stress the fundamental difference between angels and Djinns. The former are made of light and more obedient, and the latter are made of fire and unpredictable. In practice, however, there are similarities. Angels too have been treated with necessary care, and it is better not to upset them by ignoring their presence when entering a house. My neighbour told me how the revenge of an angel could easily lead to a person's death. In these stories, the difference between angels and Djinns is not clear. Okay, that's it for now. I think one of the interesting things to take away is the ambiguity of behaviour and definition of what a Jinn is, and that realistically it is a catch-all term. And certainly when you look at the last definitions of other creatures, which can also be defined as Jinn, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Through a Western prism, we would have defined that as a mermaid or a water elemental, a ghost, or an incubus or succubus. So the same type of tropes appear in the West. Is this progression of these same beliefs through migration, true to the fact that the religious roots of Christianity are the same religious roots as Islam? Is this what's carrying these stories over here, or does something predate it? Certainly within Celtic mythology, the idea of mermaids and the like predates any Abrahamic faith. So again, we're at this point where we're facing the big question: is this the folklore, mysticism, and superstitions of the Middle East being exported across the world through the Abrahamic faiths? Or actually, is this just an articulation of a universal human experience, but that has a very long and established legacy tracing back into antiquity that has been preserved through Islam? Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the channel. I will be doing some more videos on wider topics, not just the Jinn, which I've done a lot of late. If you enjoy the content, be sure to give me a like and subscribe. Thank you, and I'll be back soon with more videos.